Our News on Terror segment tonight, 12 people were killed after suicide bombers and gunmen attacked the Iranian parliament and the mausoleum of Ayatollah Khomeini in Tehran. ISIS claimed responsibility for the attack, and Iran's Revolutionary Guard is blaming Saudi Arabia. Now, this should be a way bigger story, so why isn't the mainstream media covering it? Watch. Joining me now from the Center for Security Policy, Director of the Threat Information Office, Kyle Shideler. Kyle, good to see you.
Liz, a pleasure to be back. Thank you very much.
All right, Kyle, this is a story that I think probably wins our story for the most overlooked, underreported story of the week here. 12 people died in these attacks in Iran. 12 people. ISIS claimed responsibility. I mean, if this were in a Western nation, all the mainstream media outlets would be going absolutely nuts. But we hear next to nothing about this, especially compared to the domestic political squabbles that we've been hearing. But at the same time, a terror attack in Iran is unprecedented. And my question, Kyle, is why?
Why is it not covered, or why is it unprecedented? Let's start with the first one. If there were half-price drinks at D.C. bars during Iran terrorism coverage, then I bet we'd have a lot more journalists covering it. Instead, Comey and Trump are sucking up all the oxygen in the whole world when it comes to journalism, it seems.
Right, and I guess my question too, and it's the second prong of that question, is this attack was on the parliament in Iran, but also on the tomb of the founder of the nation. Highly symbolic places for the attack to be waged. Clearly, what was the message? What was the point of the attacks on those particular locations?
And also heavily secured areas. So I think we want to keep that in mind as we think about this incident. Now, Islamic State has threatened Iran many, many times. Anti-Shiite propaganda is part of Islamic State's parlance, and attacks on Shiites in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Iraq are part and parcel of what Islamic State does. But attacks on Iran are relatively new. Now, in part, that's because Iran has had close relationships with Islamic State's predecessor, Al-Qaeda in Iraq. So they have some long-term relationships there, even though in terms of propaganda they oppose each other. But these attacks are new, and I think we have to consider them in the context of the current ongoing crisis in the Gulf with Qatar and the other Gulf states. So I would look at this attack in that context.
Right.
All eyes in the Gulf right now are on Iran.
Right, and I do want to get to the Qatar topic in just a moment, but the Iran's Revolutionary Guard are blaming Saudi Arabia for this attack. They're saying Saudi Arabia funded the terrorists, who ISIS claims to be responsible for as well. I mean, why is Iran pointing at Saudi Arabia now?
Well, they are currently under pressure because their ally Qatar is facing a blockade from Saudi Arabia and its allies. So Iran is looking to distract from that conflict and point to this terror attack on themselves to say, we are victims of terrorism, we're not sponsors of terrorism. But the reality is that both things can be true at the same time.
Right, and that seems to be the case. I mean, I don't think that's a binary choice. This also speaks, and Kyle, if you wouldn't mind expounding on this a little bit, that ISIS, the Islamic State, is predominantly Sunni Muslim versus in Iran, they're predominantly Shiite Muslim. And a lot of people overlook the fact, I think, that conflict in the Middle East between those two factions of the Islamic faith, that is more violent even than the jihad waged upon the West.
That's quite true, and it's been part of Islamic State's effort to draw attention to their role as what they see themselves as the protectors of the Sunnis, particularly with the aggressive role that Iranian-backed Shiite militias play in Iraq. So Islamic State has played up itself as protectors of the Sunnis in part in order to recruit members to its jihad. That said, attacks in Iran are relatively rare. The attacks that have been successful have been things like assassination on nuclear scientists, which are obviously state-sponsored. So did some other state have a hand in this incident? It's not beyond conception.
Right, and then back to Qatar for just one moment. I mean, we have Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Egypt, and the United Arab Emirates all cutting ties with Qatar. Kyle, it reminds me of a scene from an old Western movie where a circle of cowboys are all standing all standing in a circle and all pointing guns at each other and then constantly flipping back and forth who they're taking aim at. I mean, what is going on?
Well, Qatar got voted off the island, if you'll excuse the reality show parlance. They are not strangers to terror finance. They're probably the largest terror finance state on the Sunni side, ignoring Iran for a moment. They are major supporters and funders of the Muslim Brotherhood and supporters of Hamas. Now, the Sunni states, most particularly the United Arab Emirates, but also Saudi Arabia and Egypt, have had enough of the Muslim Brotherhood and undermining security and stability in their countries. And so they are responding to that aspect of the threat from terror, the threat to their own regimes. And they have said it is time for Qatar to stop this. Now, this happens in the context of the Riyadh summit with President Trump, who told in no uncertain terms the Sunni leaders that they needed to drive out terrorists from their midst. And it seems clear that when they heard this, the Gulf states thought, that's Qatar.
Right, I guess so. It's a mess for sure. Kyle, I appreciate you coming on the show, clearing this up, because I think a lot of times, like I said at the beginning of the segment, it's an overlooked topic because it doesn't seem to impact us here in the United States, and we shouldn't, because that danger, it starts there, it boils over, and it comes to Europe, and then it comes here. I appreciate you being on the show.